Hello, my name is Mike Gimbel. This video is entitled Marxist Dialectical Materialism, the Key to Physics, Geology, and Paleontology. This video is a follow-up to the talk that I gave at a forum in Minneapolis at Mayday Books last April. And that was entitled Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics, which is also the title of my book. If you have not watched that video, please do so before watching this video. I do not wish to repeat all that was discussed at that forum, although I will, out of necessity, cover some of that material here. Now, this video is directed in particular at those activists who consider themselves Marxists and those individuals who recognize that there is something truly rotten in theoretical physics. Dialectical materialism is the ideological methodology created by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels and further defined by Vladimir Lenin. Unfortunately, most who claim to be Marxists have made little or no effort to understand the physical basis of dialectical materialism, other than in reference to historical materialism. This is a mistake and a misunderstanding of why Marx, Engels, and Lenin so emphasized the physics implications, not just the historical meaning. Physics is the basis of materialism. The problems that in physics are not limited to physics, and that is what this video is about. The last video dealt with just physics. The problems in geology and paleontology that I will illustrate in this video are questions linked to the same ideological problem that has caused physics to run aground for more than a century in the fantasy land of relativity theories. The problem vexing all three of these sciences is the problem of understanding what is gravity. This problem started with a misunderstanding of Newton's inverse square law's mathematical solution to gravity, which failed to give a material basis for the effect described by that ingenious mathematical solution. Before I go any further, I want to thank Martin Kokas for sending me the link to James Maxlow's video on the internet of his talk about On the Expanding Earth. It caused me to purchase Maxlow's book entitled Terra Non Firma and Stephen Harrell's book entitled Dinosaurs and the Expanding Earth. Maxlow's video and these two books showed me that the current problems in physics are not limited to physics. They really opened my eyes because they provided the solution to the argument that stymied Lord Kelvin when Kelvin tried to defend George Louis Lesage's materialist solution to Newton's inverse square law in regards to gravity. Maxlow and Harrell's books are antidotes to what I term as the flat earth, static materialist view of reality. The geological static materialists, via plate tectonics, falsely view our planet as unchanging in size over billions of years. Somehow magically the Earth appeared billions of years ago at the same size it is today, rather than a product of evolution from a very small, rocky, and airless planet that has grown to its current size, now having an atmosphere and vast amounts of water. Maxlow and Hurrell's geological and paleontological evidence shows that the Earth grew from a much smaller size and is today continuing to expand at a faster and faster pace due to its greater and greater mass, which creates a greater and greater gravitational pull, causing more and more material acquisition as our planet sweeps through space. Maxlow and Hurrell have demolished the static concept of a constant diameter Earth, in the same way as Darwin demolished the belief that the current living species always existed in the past in unchanged form. In so doing, Maxlow and Hurrell have, without intending to, shown that George Louis Lesage, in his 1747 materialist solution to Newton's inverse square law for gravitation, has been right all along for these last 3 centuries. Maxlow and Hurrell's books, despite the fact that they do not refer to Lesage whatsoever, are a key weapon in the refutation of Einstein's anti-materialist relativist fantasy. Their work will go far in replacing that relativist fantasy with Lesage's materialist solution, which is based upon a materialist solution to Newton's inverse square law in regards to gravity. Einstein and his confused followers have taken physics down a strange path of magical interpretations of reality, where spheres can exist that have no radius, where parallel lines can intersect, where something called a point particle can have no mass nor a diameter, where space is something that's curved, where cause and effect, which is the very basis of all of science, is violated, where multiple universes are alleged to exist simultaneously with ours, where the concept of infinity magically has become an actual number, and where time and space become things with a beginning and an end, without a shred of physical evidence for any of this nonsense. These concepts are not science or physics. These concepts are not even good math. Infinity, as every child knows, every school child knows, they taught it early in life. Infinity is not a number. Contrary to popular opinion, scientists rarely think out of the box that they are in, or the work that they're doing. Scientists, in fact, tend to be more conservative in their thinking than the average person in regards to their own field of work. So why is that? Scientists, for the most part, have invested years, and in some cases many decades, in a belief in certain concepts. As we know, belief is closer to religion, not science. This belief in a particular concept often hardens these scientists against new ideas that challenge their long-held beliefs and, of course, in their own job security, quite often in well-paid jobs. As a result, it is the young Marxist and the young scientist and those young people wishing to be Marxists or scientists who are the primary targets of my videos on dialectical materialism. I hope that my videos can reach these youths before they capitulate to the conceptions that they do not understand but are forced to accept by tremendous social and economic pressures. Scientists are human beings and are subject to all the same social pressures as all the rest of us. Fads come and go in every aspect of human life, and science is no exception. Fads can come and go in a blink of an eye, or last for decades or even centuries. The relativity fantasy in physics is such a fad, and it has lasted, unfortunately, for more than a century. One of the barbed wire fences against new ideas in science is called the peer review process. Why is the peer review process more of a problem than a solution for scientific inquiry? Here it is. If a new paradigm is being proposed, who's going to judge it? It will likely be blocked by the peer review process because the very scientists who are to judge the new paradigm are the scientists with the most investment in the old accepted paradigm. It would be like the medieval believers in Ptolemy's epicycles judging Copernicus and Galileo's new theory. That's not good. That is why the current peer review process is a block to scientific progress and why it has to be reformed or completely overhauled. The relativity fantasy is costing the public billions and billions of dollars in wasted investment in a dead-end inquiry which will return little value and mostly reminds one of the scientists in the Middle Ages counting how many angels could fit on the tip of a pin. There needs to be both a public and scientific struggle in order to overturn the propaganda supporting the anti-materialist fantasy called relativity, and so as to return physics to its scientific roots. But why dialectical materialism? What's that got to do with it? Dialectical materialism is useful because it views continuous change as basic to our physical reality. Dialectical materialism is the opposite of static materialism. Static materialism views the world in a one-dimensional manner, as one would can see something at any single moment. Newton's solar system is essentially unchanging. God made it the way it is. To the static materialist, our role is to merely describe the universe that God created. Dialectical materialism is dynamic, not static. Darwin's theory of evolution was hailed by Karl Marx as an example of the use of dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is a theory, a methodology that is evolution in fact. It deals with all of science, not just species, whether it be for the understanding of the evolution of class society or the fight of species for survival, or understanding the physical changes on Earth over time, or the physical changes in the universe over time. Dialectical materialism explains why this change takes place and why that change must be constant, because matter in motion is the source of that constant change. In all of the universe, matter in motion is the basis for change, and change is the basis for evolution. Everything evolves, nothing stays the same. You are not the same person you were when you were born, nor who you were, excuse me, nor who you were just yesterday. Your very existence is an example of evolution, which is just another word for constant change. That constant change is why dialectical materialism is of so critical an importance in every aspect of science. Nothing is as it appears in any single moment. Most scientists try to take something out of its box and look at it out of its context. But you can't understand it unless you understand its change. Everything constantly changes. There is no now. No, you cannot point to now. Please try pointing to now. The moment you point to now, it is already in the past. No matter how hard you try, you cannot point to now. Now disappears immediately, even as you point in its direction. Pointing to now is like trying to nail liquid water to the wall. The past and the future cannot be pointed to for obvious reasons. The past is the past, and the future, by definition, is not here. And since you can't point to now, it is proof that whatever you are looking at must be viewed as it changes, not as it appears at any particular moment that is outside of the reality of that change. In other words, static materialism looks at the world as if one were looking at a photograph, as if now was all there is, while dialectical materialism looks at whatever it is examining as in a movie where everything is in constant motion and has vector direction. All motion has a vector direction. When looking at anything, one must ask where it came from and where it is going, in addition to viewing it in its apparent current state as because it is changing. It is not what it is now because it's going to change. If you cannot point to now, then if you point to any particular point along any timeline, including a beginning or an end to a timeline for whatever, you would be taking that moment out of context, and whatever item you're looking at out of context, without understanding its vector direction. The change is what is basic, not that particular moment that is artificially selected. The misunderstanding of this constant change has created one of the greatest blocks to progress in physics. That misunderstanding is the assumption, the belief, that there was a beginning to time and to space, and that there will be an end to time and space. This erroneous assumption is contradicted by a basic law of physics that says that matter and the motion of matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Since matter and the motion of matter can never be created nor destroyed, then there cannot have been a time where matter and the motion of matter did not exist, nor where matter and the motion of matter will cease to exist. The attempt to point to a moment when time started or when the universe started is an example of static, flat earth thinking, which looks at reality and views that reality completely out of context. Since the motion of matter can never be created nor destroyed, then there cannot be even a single moment without change. Change is permanent because motion cannot be destroyed. There is no beginning or an end to that change or that motion. Change is constant because motion is constant. That constant change is what we call evolution. As I said earlier, evolution is not just about living species. Evolution involves the constantly changing planet, Earth, that we live on as well. The planet Earth that we see today is not the planet Earth of hundreds of millions, if not billions of years ago. It has changed enormously. The only scientific question to be analyzed is to determine how it has changed, from whence it has come, and what is the vector of motion to where it is going. To me, after reading Maxlow and Hurrell's extremely important scientific books, it is obvious from the evidence that they cite that planet Earth has changed from a small, rocky, moon-like body, far smaller than the current Earth's radius, to grow to what it is in size today. And that change has not stopped. The Earth is continuing to expand in size as we live and breathe today. Before I go further, let me talk a little bit more about the scientific method. Occam's razor is a basic rule in science and in life itself. In everyday language, Occam's razor is what you know as the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. In science, as in life, with the KISS principle, we recognize that the simplest solution, not the most complicated solution, is usually the correct solution. When a solution is proposed that is very complicated and convoluted, we should immediately become suspicious that there is something seriously wrong with that theory. George Louis Lesage, his solution to gravity in 1747 to Newton's inverse square law 100% meets the KISS principle. It is very simple and exactly, mathematically matches the inverse square law, whereas relativity theory is highly complex with strange mathematics, actually bad mathematics, and convoluted and is continuously being patched up with new adjustments in order to try to explain away new facts that really falsify these fantasies of the relativists. The KISS principle also works in favor of the expanding Earth solution versus the unworkable proposals of the plate tectonics paradigm. Relativity is the most extreme example of a very complicated and convoluted theory with massive difficulties, where even many of those endorsing the theory openly admit that they do not understand it. In fact, one person, one of these great scientists said, only 3 people in the world understand it in a famous book. Hey, if only 3 people understand it, maybe there's something wrong about in the theory. This very complicated and convoluted fantasy has created a field day for competing pet theories in every aspect of this false paradigm. Excuse me, I had to stop for a moment. We have 2 young puppies that were getting very frisky and making lots of noise, so I had to stop. I will be continuing now. Jerry, that's everything fine? Okay. Well, maybe not. Just hold it for a second. Hopefully they'll calm down. Okay? Okay. Now continuing. The real world is not as weird as the relativists would have you think. Taking this false road did not start with the relativists, however. These relativists just took the false road and drove it over a cliff of nonsense involving those multi-universes, particles having no mass or radius, parallel lines intersecting, etc., etc. The point at which physics started to leave on a fantasy direction actually goes back to the period immediately after Newton discovered that gravity obeys the inverse square law. Newton tried but could not explain on a material basis why the inverse square law worked for gravity. Newton tried but failed. After Newton's search ended for a materialist explanation for gravity, his followers gave up the search and settled on something called action at a distance, which is the universal law of gravitation, which is a violation of science. All action must have a material cause. All action has a push force, and gravity is no exception. Even Newton objected to action at a distance as an explanation for gravity. Newton recognized that gravity must have a material cause. In 1747, George Louis Lesage solved the inverse square law with a materialist explanation. Lesage proposed that tiny subatomic gravitons moving at speeds enormously faster than the speed of light was the cause of gravity. Gravity, according to Lesage, was caused by 2 massive bodies shading the area between these 2 bodies, causing an area of lower pressure which forced the 2 bodies to be pushed towards each other. Lesage's mathematical solution exactly matched Newton's inverse square law. it was a perfect fit. Lesage's solution to the inverse square law in 1747 was at a time when people were still being burnt at the stake for violation of religious teachings. Lesage's solution that for the inverse square law to function, that all matter, including you, me, this table, and this planet that you live on, must be almost entirely empty space, 99.99% empty space, so as to allow virtually all of Lesage's gravitons to be able to pass through the entire planet Earth without interacting with a single atom. That conclusion was so revolutionary that only recently has science come to the same conclusion that all matter is almost entirely empty space. So what happened in 1747? Was Lesage heralded as a great scientist? No. His conclusion was so fantastic that who in 1747 could accept something so extreme as a theory that says that all matter is almost entirely empty space, with almost infinitely tiny particles of matter moving enormously faster than the speed of light, being able to pass through the entire planet without interacting with a single atom. That would have been a lot to accept in 1747. In any case, the scientists of his day had long since accepted gravity as a mysterious and incorrect action at a distance, a so-called universal law of gravity. A little over a century later, in 1873, Lord Kelvin, one of the great physicists of the 19th century, championed Lesage's theory, since it now agreed with the new discovery of the kinetic theory of gases, in addition to fitting the inverse square law. Kelvin fought hard for Lesage, but had to retreat when it was demonstrated that the thermodynamic effects could not be accounted for in 19th century physics. Even so, it's incomprehensible to me that Lesage's theory, which now agreed not only 100% with Newton's inverse square law, and now in 1873 with the 100% with the kinetic theory of gases, that it was still not accepted. That blows my mind. Even Kelvin, great physicist that he was, had to retreat when faced with a challenge to the theory that showed that the amount of heat produced in the planet Earth by Lesage's gravitons, at least according to the science of that day, seemed likely to cause the planet to explode or be incinerated. So how is the heat created to be accounted for? When I read Maxlow and Harrell's books, I almost yelled out, "Eureka!" Here was the solution that Kelvin would have gladly grabbed onto had he had Maxlow and Harrell's information available to him. Kelvin had to retreat not because he was wrong, but because he was the prisoner of a static view of physics that was prevalent at that time. The theory of evolution in regards to the survival of species was had just come out. It was a brand new theory, and it was still being defended and had been immediately endorsed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels as an example of dialectical materialist methodology. What about medicine? They're just starting to learn about what causes disease, that there's actually little things you can see in a microscope that is causing disease. Prior to then, to that period, medicine was little more than witch doctory. Science, all of science in that period was still in its infancy. In the mid-1800s, they were just starting to dig up the bones of dinosaurs. And that showed that there were species that lived millions and millions of years earlier. Geology and paleontology were just starting to try to figure out the history of our planet, looking at those rocks. How can we read the history in these rocks that we're digging up now? This new evidence was too little understood at that time, and it was far too soon for Kelvin to understand how to answer the challenge he faced to the heat problem created by Lesage's theory. That answer is only now available from the modern studies that show that the planet that we live on, Earth, has evolved, just as each living species evolves. And each living individual evolves when you were born to the day you die. The solution to the heat problem that vexed Kelvin has been resolved, in my opinion, by the conclusion that there has been a massive increase in the Earth's size over hundreds of millions of years, actually billions of years, via the gravitational capture of matter in motion. And as the Earth's mass increases, the amount of matter in motion that it is sweeping up in space increases in rate year by year. The proofs that the Earth is expanding is so obvious and so numerous that it boggles the mind that it has yet to be accepted as scientific fact. The proof is obvious to anyone, you or I, who has eyes to see. Every one of us who is not blind has seen the solution to the heat problem, including the scientists who deny that they have seen the answer. The first evidence that our planet's gravity, based on a far smaller planet Earth, has come from paleontology. I probably got my first book about dinosaurs around 1952 when I was 8 years old. Like any other child, and like many other children, I can't speak for everyone, I was so fascinated. I dreamed of having one as a pet. I was fascinated by the gigantic size of these creatures. One of the first things, however, that I read and which has stuck to me in my brain with me ever since 1952 was the paleontologists wrote in those books in 1952 that they did not understand how dinosaur bones could support those massive bodies. This was a basic engineering problem, and those dinosaur bones, even in 1952, made no engineering sense. Likewise, in those paleontological studies that were being made, they discovered that there were plants existed that were really massive, but had little or no supportive structure. Giant plants with no structure to support it. Let's take a common plant. Most of you are familiar with horsetail plants, especially driving on highways in a low area. They're little thin, reeded type plant with a tuft on top, and they usually go at most to 6 to 10 foot high. Today, But in those days, long ago, they grew up to 49 feet high, millions of years ago. Biggest trees. That height, of course, is impossible for today's horsetail plant under today's gravity. What allowed them to grow so high millions of years ago without the engineering structure to support such a height? These dinosaurs and plants, if they lived today, should have collapsed under their own weight. In addition, all the other land creatures, not just the dinosaurs and plants, had enormous size. Dragonflies, little dragonflies, had the wingspan of birds back then. Have any of you seen a dragonfly with a 19-inch wingspan? That could not happen on today's planet Earth, but those dragonflies flew on the ancient planet Earth. So how was that even possible back then? The obvious and only possible conclusion was that the Earth's diameter must have been far smaller at that time, millions of years ago. That would mean that the mass of the Earth was far smaller at that time, which means that gravity would have to have been far less at that time. And therefore, the size of the dinosaurs and those plants and those insects matched their environment because they matched the size requirements, the maximum size requirements of that much lower gravitational pressure. Therefore, the movie Jurassic Park might be very enjoyable, but it is not scientifically possible, not because they can't re-engineer some DNA to have those animals born again, but if we did bring them back, their bones would quickly crack into smithereens and reduce those pathetic creatures to gravitationally crushed flesh and bone. In fact, if you look at the paleontological record, you will see a slow and steady reduction in the maximum size of animals over the entire history of the species on planet Earth. A steady, straight line, especially for the land animals. Elephants are the most massive land animals today simply because that is the size limitation that today's gravity imposes. Millions of years in the future, the elephants will necessarily be smaller than today's elephants as gravity continues to increase as the Earth's mass continues to grow in size as well as in diameter. Can we view this increase in mass as it happens? Yes, we can, and this is the second piece of evidence. What does it look like? What have you seen that you actually seen that makes you understand that the planet is growing? First, you've all seen pictures of volcanoes. In volcanoes we see magma rising from the Earth's mantle. Three things are being spewed out by these volcanoes. They're spewing out rock, volatiles, which becomes atmosphere, and heated water, superheated water, during the eruptions. Most of these volcanoes are on what is known as hot spots. These volcanoes are only visible because they are above sea level. However, the vast majority of volcanic activity is at the bottom of our vast oceans. only in the past few decades have we become aware of the existence of the massive scale of tectonic activity on the surface of the Earth. That for 40,000 kilometers, 24,000 miles, is a crack in the Earth, a number of cracks actually in the Earth that go all around the bottoms of the oceans, from which all this tectonic activity is going. Yes, the modern science has discovered that the planet is cracked all the way around in a very elaborate manner. There is a ring of undersea volcanic activity emanating from those cracks. That series of massive cracks in the planet makes Earth look like an object having several seams, like the stitches you see on a baseball. These cracks go all around the bottoms of the oceans. These undersea cracks in the Earth's crust, which are either termed ocean rifts, ocean ridges, have new magma, volatiles, and water upwelling continuously from them. These cracks in the planet is where you see the continuously forming new crust that is being pushed up and then horizontally outwards away from these undersea cracks, 90 degrees directly away. This upwelling magma, which constantly creates new crust as it cools, pushing the old crust just formed just prior to it further along, and then pushing the planet, each of the continents along that ride on top of this new crust, is what caused the continents to be pushed apart. Before these cracks first appeared in the crust of our planet, the current continental plates were the entire surface of the planet. Continental plates, the plate of North America, the plate of South America, the plate of Africa, the plate of Eurasia, of India, of Australia, of Antarctica. When you subtract the new crust, and that's what these scientists did, they subtracted the crust and they put the continental plates back together again. They discovered, oh, they fit neatly together on a smaller planet, on a smaller diameter planet. And it is impossible that is chance. It would really shock the early investigators of the Earth expansion, tectonics, was how easy it was to make that demonstration-sized model out of the existing continental plates. When they subtracted those crusts, it fitted together virtually 100%, neatly. Many of you know that I do statistical analysis. The chances that this perfect fit is a chance occurrence are impossibly small and can be ignored. Their demonstration that the fit is complete is the perfect example of the KISS principle. Once they demonstrated that fit, the only question that should have remained was the question of how the Earth changed to what it is today. But when they demonstrated what they found, the result wasn't what we should have expected. It was not accepted, and it's part of the big problem. Those continental crusts that fit neatly together were forced apart by cracks as the earth expanded. There were no oceans before those expansion cracks appeared. What existed were continental seas, because you have a complete planet covered by continent. Those seas occupied the low areas of those continental plates. So once the cracks opened up, those continental seas drained into the newly formed oceans. Now, where did it first open up? It first opened up in the Pacific, all from north to south, and that's why the Pacific occupies almost half the planet. Whereas the crack that goes from the middle of the North and South Atlantic Oceans, from north to south, from pole to pole, opened up much later, and that's why the Atlantic is much narrower than the Pacific. What these cracks, with their new magma rising under the oceans, have created is a crust which is only a fraction of the thickness of the continental plates that ride on top of this newly formed crust. Now, to dealing with plate tectonics, why is it a flat Earth theory? It attempts unsuccessfully to explain facts with an unsustainable assumption, not a fact, assumption, that the Earth has always been its current diameter. Plate tectonics uses a Procrustean bed method for their assumption. For those of you who don't know the myth of the Procrustean bed, a very tall person in a very short bed, the solution to make the individual fit the bed was to cut his feet off so he fits the bed. That's the Procrustean method of making the facts meet the theory, rather than the proper scientific method of making the theory fit the facts. And that Procrustean bed solution is not science. Plate tectonics, basing itself on that unsustainable assumption that the Earth has always been the same size it is today, then is forced to come up with a second ridiculous theory, unreasonable theory, to explain their unsustainable major theory. And that by some miraculous manner, that vast amount of magma that is coming up every second from on the Earth's surface at the bottom of the oceans is being recycled back into the Earth thousands of miles away. They say that there's a new that the new crust that is being created is being sent back into the mantle from whence it came. What, have you ever seen that? You've seen the upwelling. You haven't ever seen the downwelling, have you? So it would be like saying, oh, there's volcanoes that you can stand on their head that will send their magma back down into the earth. Have you ever seen a volcano standing on its head? I don't think so. An upside-down volcano don't exist. Now, that would be a sight to see. I'd like to see it. The plate tectonics fantasy says it's all being sent down something that they've invented called a subduction zone. Have they actually shown you a picture of one of these subduction zones where you can see the magma going down? No, I haven't seen it. They haven't, and you, neither have you. They say, the most ridiculous, they say there's a subduction zone on the west coast of North America, at the coast of California, where all the crust is being sent back down to the earth, into the earth, as their explanation for how those plates are moving. But the Pacific expansion crack, that huge one going from north to south, just happens at California to be right on the coast. Not a subduction zone, but a vast upwelling of magma is coming up precisely there. So, so where do they come up with this subduction zone there when, in fact, the eruption zone is there? The crack in the earth is right there with the magma coming up. There. That magma is visible. To your eye, to their eye, to my eye. Not subduction. That massive amount of magma, that rising every moment from these underseas cracks in the ocean bottom, is what is causing the earth to grow in size and solves the riddle that stumped Lord Kelvin. The heat created by Lessage's gravitons has not, at least not yet, incinerated our planet. Instead, it is the explanation of the mechanism for transferring the heat created from capturing that matter in motion, which creates the growth in mass of the planet, as well as the reason why there's an atmosphere and oceans emanating from the volatiles emitted from the hydrothermal vents at those expansion cracks that makes life on planet Earth possible. When the Earth was very, very small, the gravity was too small to retain an atmosphere or water on its surface. It is the expansion of the Earth that makes life possible. So we need to say, hey, great, but there's a problem too. I'll get to that. The magma that you see rising from the bottom of our oceans is the product of the capture of matter in motion. That capturing of matter in motion is proceeding faster and faster today as the increased mass of the Earth and its greater diameter is gathering faster and faster more and more matter. In my opinion, this means that the Earth is unlikely to survive much more than 50 to 100 million years. And this is just a thrown out number by me. It's not based on a study, just from what it looks like to me. That the Earth is unlikely to survive more than 50 to 100 million years more before it explodes. These expansion cracks at the bottoms of our oceans are the protection against such an explosion, but only temporarily so. At some point, the pressure of that expansion will exceed the ability of those cracks to let that internal pressure out. As an example, there are two main types of volcanoes. Mount St. Helens in Washington State is an example of a volcano that explodes. Most of you saw the explosion, you're old enough to be here when it happened. Whereas Mount Kilauea in Hawaii is an example of a volcano that allows the pressure of the magma to escape without exploding. In the region between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt. Charles Boyle's law postulated that there should be a planet there. To me, it seems obvious that there was a planet there, and it exploded. What remains of that explosion are two things: the asteroids and the comets. The deceased scientist Tom Van Flandern even went to the extent of trying to take down the known trajectories of the existing comets so as to compute their trajectories to see when that explosion took place. And he concluded from his calculations, using his computer's program, that the planet exploded only a few million years ago. It's a long time ago, still fairly recent. Our planet, like you and me, had a beginning and will have an end. Unfortunately, that end is likely to be a lot sooner than I had imagined when I was younger, but that end is still likely to be far, far in the future, long after we are gone. But that end is still only tens of millions of years from now, more, not hundreds and hundreds of millions of years in my estimation. Perhaps Mars will have grown large enough by that time to sustain a thicker atmosphere and water on the surface where our species could go there and survive. But of course that's all speculation. I'll leave it there. Finally, I urge everyone, especially those interested in Marxism, to read Frederick Engels' book entitled Anti-Düring and Lenin's book entitled Materialism and Empirio-Criticism. These are the basic books on dialectical materialism. I would also urge you to read my book entitled Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics. I look forward to the day when the ubiquitous pictures of Einstein on people's walls and in books on physics are replaced by a portrait of George Louis Lesage. Let's get to work returning science to reality. Thank you. Here's my two little terrorist puppies, Hugs and Kisses, and my wife Jerry, who kept them in line while I tried to do this, I hope successfully, interesting video. Thank you again, and Hugs and Kisses thanks you for releasing them from their prison so they can run around.
Thank you.
Okay.